Georgia tight end Brock Bowers did not test at the NFL Combine, but you shouldn't be dropping him down in your Dynasty rankings. We will explain why in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. On today's show, we're going to be looking at a few combine losers and discussing whether or not you should be dropping them down in your dynasty leagues. Kate, I want to start with Georgia tight end Brock Bowers because he weighed in at the NFL Combine. Came in rather small, or smaller than maybe what people anticipated, and then did not work out in Indianapolis. How concerned are you about Brock Bowers moving forward?
I'm not concerned, but I will say, so like for those of you maybe wondering, why would he weigh in but not work out? So the general consensus, I feel like this can go one of two ways. Sometimes you'll see players not weigh in and you'll see them work out, and it's probably because maybe they dropped some weight. They're going to try to test a little bit better than you might expect, and then they'll get back up to their playing weight, which might generally decrease their athletic testing numbers. I think the opposite is probably true for Brock Bowers, who came in and I'm going to be honest, like still weighed in pretty small, 243 pounds, 6'3" and 1/8 inches. Both of those ranked 15th percentile or lower among the NFL tight end cohort. So I think it all just comes down to, are you going to be a believer in the size, or are you going to be a believer in the prospect? And this just comes down to prospect over size for me, because there's not any doubt in my mind that Brock Bowers is one of the most explosive tight ends in the National Football League. The moment he's drafted, he's one of the most explosive tight ends in the National Football League. We're also seeing that sort of trend where the NFL is becoming a bit more friendly to some undersized players. That includes wide receivers, but I think also includes tight ends, especially when they're fitting the mold of this receiving tight end as opposed to, a blocking tight end or more of a hybrid type player.
Here's why I'm not concerned. First of all, about the weight. The average weight at the NFL Combine for the top 10 dynasty tight ends right now, Kate, is 247 pounds. I'm gonna throw that graphic back up there right now. That means that Brock Bowers is 4 pounds off of the NFL average when it comes to the top 10 dynasty tight ends. It's just not that big of a deal. 4 pounds. It's like, that's one really nice dinner at Chick-fil-A, right? Like, it's not a big deal at all.
Of all the places you pick Chick-fil-A, Marcus.
Kind of craving Chick-fil-A lately.
We could have had a steak dinner. We could have had
I know. Well, I'm just saying, I can eat a lot of Chick-fil-A.
Come on.
It just doesn't concern me. Now, the lack of the athletic testing, I get. Like, you would like to see him perform at that number. A couple things I want to mention. Number one, Brock Bowers is coming back from tightrope ankle surgery. It's something that he got during the season at Georgia. He only played, I think it was 4 or 5 games this season. Maybe he's not 100% healthy, and he doesn't want to go out there and run a slower time than what he actually is. I think that's possible. I think it's also worth mentioning that Georgia's pro day is in like 8 days. So maybe you're just better off holding off until Georgia's pro day here. Was it next week, in 2 weeks, or whatever it is, and just do your testing there when it's that close to the combine. I understand going there and measuring in and then just waiting until you're a little bit more comfortable in your own environment. And the last thing is, Kate, I just don't care. Actually, the lighter that Brock Bowers is probably the more interesting he is for me, because it means he's going to be blocking less, right? If he's 238 pounds, you're just not going to have him in line. You're going to have him more in pass routes, which is what we care about when it comes to fantasy football.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right on target here. And we've talked about, the fact that a lot of these more hybrid tight ends, they take a lot more time to develop. But you saw Sam Laporta come out and make an immediate difference in year one, and it is because he was such a prominent figure in the blocking scheme. And Sam Laporta, I'll mention, 6'3", 245 pounds. So we're kind of like right on target here with Brock Bowers. Now, his dynasty value, I mean, immediately out of the gate, before he has an NFL team next to his name, tight end 6. He's behind Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, Trey McBride, TJ Hawkinson, Travis Kelce, and that is it. End of list. 21-year-old Brock Bowers. Now, I mean, Marcus, like I
I'm
said,
shocked. To be honest, I'm shocked that it's that low.
I'm shocked, but I don't know what.
Like, explain to me who in your dynasty leagues is keeping Travis Kelce over Brock Bowers.
I'm certainly not. And I
No.
think, probably the people that are very excited about the end of the season that we saw for Travis Kelce. But I'm going to remind y'all, 34 years old, got to be turning 35. I'm trying to get out on Travis Kelce before the shoe drops and cashing in on that elite value. I do think Brock Bowers, much like a Sam Laporta with that explosive playmaking ability, I do think he can make a immediate impact on the field year one in the right offense. Give me the kid, give me the 21-year-old spring chicken over a guy like Travis Kelce, who I know he's going to be, a Hall of Fame tight end, but Marcus, his career is going to end eventually.
Yeah.
And
Can I give you the list of tight ends that I would take right now over Brock Bowers in Dynasty?
please do.
And that's the list. Done. That's it.
Wow.
I mean, you could. I know it was quick. You could talk me into Sam Laporta or Dalton Kincaid or Trey McBride, just depending a little bit on my roster construction. But in a vacuum, I'd just rather have Brock Bowers. I just get the feeling that when Bowers tests, if he does test at Georgia's Pro Day here in a couple days, he's going to run in the 4.4s. He's going to have some insane agility scores, and that's just going to get everybody really excited again. And maybe he doesn't win at 243. Okay, maybe it's 237. Who knows? He's an elite athlete. He's a special prospect. He's a special tight end. And I think he's just going to remind everybody that the further that we get removed from the combine, the less people are going to care about it. Don't drop Brock Bowers down at all, despite not doing anything at the combine.
Yeah, for sure. All in on Brock Bowers and that immediate tight end one upside.
Yep. All right, let's talk about a couple of receivers that had up and down days at the NFL Combine and whether you should be buying or selling them over the next few months. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing that you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? Would you read a book? Or would you show up for a friend? A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what really matters to you so that you can go and do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Kate, let's talk about Keon Coleman, the wide receiver from Florida State. Dominated the jumps. I mean, just had fantastic jumps. Came in, I believe the number was 6'2.5", over 200 pounds. But he ran a 4.61 40-yard dash, and that's usually not a great sign for a receiver. Are you selling Keon Coleman after a somewhat disappointing combine?
I am, Marcus, and it's not necessarily just because of the, combine itself, which does pose, some fairly relevant red flags here, but when we look at sort of the consistency in his overall profile as a prospect, he is young. He's only 20 years old, so like we'll take that with a grain of salt, but he's got the size which you like. But generally speaking, even in his breakout season, not the best analytics
No.
profile. I want you to hear this, Marcus. He had a 28.9% open target rate against single coverage. That ranked 450th among 451 qualifying receivers in the NCAA.
Mhm.
That is not fantastic. 31st percentile in yards per route run, 42nd percentile in PFF receiving grade, 51st percentile in overall separation percentage. I'm not sold because we didn't necessarily have a ton of yardage to even accomplish or to complement those 11 touchdowns. Perhaps he can be, this big play guy, but what am I missing with Keon Coleman?
Well, he does have really good size, right? That's the first thing. 6'3", 213 pounds. The both the jumps were in the 80th percentile or higher. So that part of it's really interesting. He's only 20 years old, and the catch radius is just insane. Like when you're watching his tape, he makes some unbelievable grabs in traffic. But that's kind of the rub, right? Like he's going to
That
be
is the rub.
he's going to be in contested catch situations all the time. I do
Because
think
he
he's
can't separate. Is it
because
like
he can't separate. So it puts him in this group of receivers where you either have to trust that he's going to be able to overcome not being able to separate, or you trust that maybe as he grows, because again, 20 years old, and because he's so explosive in the lower body, that he was going to be able to overcome the 40-yard dash. I will say, one of the players that he really reminds me of is like Allen Robinson coming out of Penn State. Allen Robinson had very similar metrics, was incredibly young, but had that 4.6 40-yard dash. And now it limited a little bit on what Allen Robinson could do down the field, but still a very effective receiver. Is he more Allen Robinson, or is he more like late career Kelvin Benjamin? Benjamin, same school, Florida State, where it's just really hard to get him the football. It's tough.
I do think maybe the tiebreaker for Keon Coleman is going to be landing spot, and depending on the type of quarterback that is throwing him the ball and how accurate that quarterback can be in putting him in advantageous, even if you're not separating, but putting the ball in a right spot for you to be able to really capitalize on that contested catchability. I just like from a fantasy perspective, a lot of what I'm looking for, obviously I want the high ceiling,
Yes.
which Keon Coleman could absolutely have a high ceiling, but a lot more of what I see is maybe a lack of consistency that's going to benefit my fantasy team on an every down basis. It feels like he would have to be more of an outlier for me in
Yeah.
order to be a fantasy relevant player that I can just stick in my lineup on any given week.
I will also say with Keon Coleman, he's one of these guys where if you're doing your rookie drafts now, or the rookies are already in your pool because of a Devy league or whatever, I'm just not that interested. Now, I might jump back in depending on the landing spot. Like if he can land with a really good quarterback that can kind of throw him open or is willing to throw him contested catches, that's different. Like I would be in then. But right now, as we stand, there's just so many good receivers in this class, Kate, that I'm willing to wait a little bit to see I want to see where he lands before I make a big investment on Keon Coleman.
Let me just say, like, I think there are if so, sometimes we'll come out and we'll talk about prospects, right? And like potential upside for some of these more raw prospects that like still have some room to grow. I just think this is a class of like really refined
Yeah.
prospects that it's harder for me to get on board with some of these more raw potential assets. And not Keon Coleman's fault, but that is where we are. Before we close out on Coleman, I want to hear, can you give me like 3 landing spots for Keon Coleman that if he lands there, you'll be back in? Are there even 3?
Yeah. Oh, there's 3. To me, I think a lot of people had him going like middle first round. I just don't see that anymore. I think he's more of a early first round, early day 2. Sorry, late first round, early day 2. Like if he goes to the Indianapolis Colts and he's the number 2 receiver there, I think that makes some sense. If he goes to, maybe a landing spot would be like Baltimore, right? Odell Beckham's going to leave. Rashad Bateman in the last year of his contract. I think they could really use a receiver like Keon Coleman on the outside. I think that makes some sense. And I'll give you one more. I think Detroit could really upgrade that Josh Reynolds spot. Now, I know Jameson Williams is potentially going to factor in there a little bit, but I do think Keon Coleman as a big X receiver with Amon-Ra St. Brown playing in the slot and then using Jameson Williams as a Z receiver makes a lot of sense to me.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think him going to a situation where he doesn't have to come in and be the one is
Yes.
going to be the most ideal circumstance for him in particular. Before we close out this segment, I want to get your thoughts on Javon Baker, UCF wide receiver, who also didn't have the most fabulous day in Indy.
No, this was somebody who a lot of people had as like a mid-round sleeper, pretty good at the Senior Bowl, a former recruit at Alabama, went to UCF in 2022, 2023, 1,100 receiving yards, super, super dynamic. But the testing numbers were just blah. And when you're a non-Power 5 school, you want to have your guy walk on water. And unfortunately, that just wasn't Javon Baker. Ran a 4.54 40-yard dash. I think a lot of people were anticipating that he was going to run in the low 4.4s. Didn't happen. Even more concerning for me, the 10-yard split 1.58. That's a 48th percentile. Broad jump 50th percentile. Now, we've seen plenty of receivers in the NFL have average metrics and still come out to be fantasy stars. I do think it matters more when you're a late round receiver because you don't have the draft capital. You need to explode on the field. And I think his athleticism is good, but it's not special. And unfortunately for Javon Baker in a really, really good receiver class, there were so many other receivers that tested better than him at bigger schools. I won't be surprised if Javon Baker finds his way on day 3 now, rather than maybe 2nd or 3rd round pick.
Yeah, kind of disappointing. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head here with the kind of level of competition that they're going to be facing, or that he did face, right? Couldn't break out here at Alabama, obviously a super competitive school when you consider the talented receivers that have come out from Alabama. But UCF, I want you to explode off of the page. I want you to have the most dominant stats, and I want you to take over that offense.
We want those guys to walk on water, right? Like it wants to be so clear and obvious that you're the best player in the field. And to his credit, he was just athletically compared to this class, very average. Again, compared to this class.
Yeah, tough class to be a mid to later round wide receiver in, I'm going to say.
All right, let's talk about some running backs that had disappointing days because there were several of them that underperformed at the NFL Combine. We will get to them next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Maybe you can go bet on the Lakers, who are on a little bit of a hot streak right now after beating the Thunder on Monday night. Just go visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. I want to let you know on tomorrow's show, we've got the great Matt Williamson here to answer your Twitter questions. So make sure that you send them into us at Marcus_Mosher, at Kate Modjuk, at Williamson NFL. But Kate, let's finish up here by talking about some running backs. I want to go to Bucky Irving, who had just a very middling day on Saturday.
Really disappointing kind of day. And Bucky Irving coming out, prospect out of Oregon, not the biggest guy. So I think people, kind of suspected that he would have a better day, right? 5'9", 192 pounds, ranked in the 60th percentile with a 4.55 40-yard dash. But Marcus, the explosive metrics were absolutely abysmal. A sub 30-inch vertical, 5th percentile, 9'7" broad jump. That's 33rd percentile. Like, generally speaking, Bucky Irving, for having been one of the most productive receiving running backs in the NCAA over the past 2 seasons, did not win us over with his athletic testing here in Indianapolis.
No, he didn't. And it's unfortunate because his game is built on speed and quickness. And he just didn't show that. Now, there have been running backs that have been similar. I think Dalvin Cook comes to mind. Dalvin Cook had a really, really bad NFL combine, still managed to become a really successful player. But in a class where all these guys are so close together, you wanted to see him test well. That just didn't happen. And now you have to wonder, like, Trey Benson, who we talked about on yesterday's show, ran a 4.39 at 216 pounds. I would be shocked if Benson isn't drafted ahead of him. Even, some of these other running backs that are in that same range, I think all moved ahead of Bucky Irving. And I just don't know how excited the NFL is going to be to draft a running back that's under 195 pounds, that doesn't run in the 4.4s, that had very poor jump scores, and didn't test at any of the agility stuff. I'm a little concerned.
Yeah, and I think, Marcus, what makes this a little bit more difficult for Bucky Irving in particular, and the next guy we're going to talk about, is that this is not a clear-cut running back class. I don't think there's not a ton of well-defined tiers in this group coming out of the 2024 draft class at the running back position. So I think what you're going to be looking for guys with these similar production profiles, you're going to be using these athletic testing metrics as maybe the tiebreakers. And when the tiebreakers are falling out of your favor in a number of these categories, because it wasn't just one category for Bucky Irving where he struggled, it was all of them across the board. So like for a guy that, you really wanted to see a lot more from, especially considering the size. Really tough day for Bucky Irving. Now, that's not to say that he's going to be a bust. Again, one of the most productive receiving running backs in the NCAA over the past couple of seasons. He's got some juice to him. I think, when I watched him on tape, more explosive than you would probably guess based on that testing. But I mean, Marcus, over the past 2 seasons, led the FBS with a 96.1 PFF rushing grade, 40% missed forced tackle rate, averaged 4.16 yards after contact per attempt, ranked top 7 among running backs in the league, 76 receptions, 659 receiving yards in the regular collegiate season here over the past 2 years. Like, his production profile is excellent. It's just that when you're looking at these tiebreakers, again, they're all going to fall against Bucky Irving, which is super unfortunate.
All right, let's mention Audric Estime, who, again, some of these players had really weird combines because Audric Estime, 5'11", 221 pounds. He had a 38-inch vertical, 86th percentile, a 10.5 broad jump, 85th or 88th percentile, did 23 bench press reps, 85th percentile, but a 4.71 10-yard split. And Kate, if you look at the history of running backs that have run a 4.7 or slower at the NFL Combine. The most successful players are Rex Burkhead, 4.73, and like Gary Russell, a Steeler running back / fullback who ran like a 4.77. Like that's it. It's really, really scary. But I don't know what to do with Audric Estime because everything else was so good other than his long speed.
The long speed was definitely concerning, but I think the most confusing part of this entire combine for Audric Estime was the fact that he was so explosive on some of these, like the vertical, the broad jump. Also, like want to mention the size when we're talking about Estime came in at 221, just over 5'11. But again, Marcus, one of these running backs that was super productive in college this past season, over 1,300 regular season rushing yards, 18 touchdowns, just a single fumble in that span. Had the second highest PFF rushing grade. It ranked 8th in missed forced tackles, ranked 4th in terms of runs of 15 plus yards. Like he did have some explosive playmaking ability. And I can't help but wonder, what is it with Notre Dame running backs and their sheer inability to run the 40-yard dash? Because from a production standpoint, I think you looked at Audric Estime and I love his running style. I love everything about him. The 40-yard dash, though, is so puzzling. And the one thing I'm going to say is that I don't think he looked overly slow. He's not going to win out with his speed. He's going to win out, I think, with more of his running style. But I don't think he looked as slow as you would guess with a 4.7 40-yard dash.
I know. It's crazy, isn't it? I do think Kyron Williams is actually going to help estimate here a little bit, right? And Kyron didn't run quite as slow, but it wasn't fast either, right? Like it wasn't great. I do think the lower body explosion, the jumps and the weight are going to help him a little bit. I don't want to knock him. I just want to see first where he ends up. And I think much like a lot of these running backs, the draft capital is going to matter. Like if he goes in the 3rd round, great. But he falls to the 6th or 7th round because of that lack of speed. That's where I get a little concerned.
I do think that the Kyron Williams and also the fact like we're helmet scouting here, but
I know it's not good.
Running back coming out of Notre Dame who can't run a 40-yard dash, who looks good on tape, like that literally was Kyron Williams. And now look, he's a top 5 dynasty running back. So I do think that's probably going to help his cause. And I think that, maybe people are going to see the size, see the explosive metrics, see the play style, and probably look at that 40-yard dash and maybe discount it a little bit more than they would for a Bucky Irving, let's say.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every single day. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go check out the YouTube show as well. We've been doing some really cool graphics, so if you're not watching us on YouTube, go check it out. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow with Matt Williamson to answer your Dynasty questions.